Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're setting off on what we're calling the super thinking journey.
Hmm.
The idea isn't just to list off a bunch of concepts. It's really about getting these frameworks deep inside, so they become almost automatic tools you just reach for.
That's exactly it. Our mission here really is about functional distillation. We're taking these core mental models, these sort of operating systems for thinking from all over the place.
Right. Physics, economics.
Statistics, yeah.
Yeah.
The ones that are genuinely useful, universally, for day-to-day decisions, for tackling tough problems, and honestly, for just figuring out what's true. We want to give you, the listener, basically a massive, mandatory system upgrade for your brain.
I like that, a system upgrade. And when we talk about these mental models, the sources we looked at kept coming back to this really powerful analogy. It's the idea of mental multiplication versus mental addition.
Oh yeah, that one's key.
It really nails the efficiency gap we're trying to bridge, doesn't it?
It's probably the best way to frame the difference between just, regular thinking and super thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Think about a complex problem. Let's say calculating compound interest on a loan over, 10 years.
Okay.
You could sit there and add up every single day's interest payment, painstakingly, starting from scratch, day one, D2.
Yeah, that's mental addition.
Exactly. It's slow. You're bound to make mistakes. It's just
Wildly inefficient. Painfully slow is right. But okay, once you grasp the higher level model, the concept of compound interest itself, which is basically just exponential multiplication, right?
Right.
You just plug the numbers into the formula and boom, done.
Yeah.
Instantly.
That's the leverage. Speed, efficiency, power. That's super thinking. You skip potentially hundreds of hours of grunt work because you adopted a better tool, a better model.
And it's not something we're born with, is it? The sources make that really clear.
No, absolutely not. Look at that fascinating example of the Piraham people in the Amazon. Their language, apparently, only has concepts for a little bit and a lot, basically. No specific numbers beyond maybe 2 or 3.
Wow. So they struggle to count.
They do, let alone do arithmetic. And it's not about intelligence, not at all. It just highlights that these foundational concepts like specific numbers, numeracy, they have to be learned. They're invented tools.
Right. And once you learn one, like multiplication,
it's almost impossible to forget how much easier it makes things. That's the goal here.
Yeah.
Build up these fundamental blocks so you can reason about almost any problem, doesn't matter the field, at a much higher level.
Exactly. We're filling up your mental toolbox. Because the danger, and this is a cognitive bias itself, Maslow's hammer.
Ah, yes, Maslow's hammer.
Crucial.
It's that old saying, if all you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail.
And Maslow's hammer is itself a mental model we need to watch out for. If your only tool is, say, statistical analysis, you start seeing every problem as a data set needing regression. Or if you only think psychologically, everything becomes about relationships or childhood trauma.
Precisely. You end up trying to hammer in a screw because hammering is all you know how to do. It just makes the problem worse. We need a wide range of tools, mental models from all disciplines so we can pick the right one for the job at hand.
Okay, so let's get into this foundational part of the journey. This constant effort towards, well, being wrong less.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about it. You make hundreds of decisions every single day. Some tiny what to have for lunch, others huge, like career changes, big investments.
Absolutely. The goal isn't like achieving perfection. That's impossible. It's about consistently improving your batting average, reducing those mistakes you really didn't need to make.
Those avoidable mistakes.
Exactly. And the first step, the sources really hammered this home, is spotting the mistakes you caused. And for that, there's a brilliant idea borrowed from sports. The unforced error.
The tennis analogy.
Yeah.
Love this one.
Right. In tennis, an unforced error isn't when your opponent hits some amazing shot you couldn't return. It's when you mess up an easy shot.
Yeah.
You hit a simple volley straight into the net. Or the double fault serving. It was on you.
And that metaphor is just so powerful because it applies everywhere, doesn't it? Unforced errors in managing your money.
Like missing a payment deadline and getting hit with a fee you could have easily avoided.
Or in cooking, you mess up a simple recipe because you weren't paying attention.
Yep. So the point of this whole deep dive isn't about guaranteeing you always make the decision that turns out perfectly in the long run because, uncertainty is always there.
But you can't predict everything.
But you can dramatically cut down on the number of times you make those basic, avoidable mistakes, those unforced errors.
And cutting down on those directly connects to this idea of antifragile thinking, which is maybe a step beyond just being resilient.
Yeah, it's a really important distinction. Resilience means, okay, you take a hit, you get stressed, and you bounce back to where you started.
You recover.
Right. Antifragility means you take that hit, that shock, that stress, maybe even that mistake, and you actually get better because of it. Stronger, more capable.
Like muscles after a workout. You stress them, create tiny tears, and they rebuild stronger, better adapted for the next time.
Exactly the same idea, but for your thinking process. If your thinking is antifragile, every time you make an unforced error and you learn from it, you adjust the model. Your thinking actually improves. You use the failure to sharpen the tool.
Okay, so building this antifragile mind, making fewer unforced errors. Where do we begin? It seems like we need to go right down to the foundations.
We do. And that means arguing from first principles.
This is one of those concepts that sounds simple, but maybe people don't always grasp what it really means in practice. It's not just thinking hard.
No, it's about deconstruction.
Yeah.
Breaking a problem down to its absolute most fundamental, irreducible truths, the things you know are true, and then building your solution or understanding back up from that base, ignoring for a moment all the existing assumptions or the way it's always been done, the recipes.
Right. It's the difference between, say, the student who only knows the buttons to press on a fancy calculator.
Exactly. And the engineer who actually understands the mathematical principles behind the calculator. If the calculator breaks, the student is lost.
But the engineer.
The engineer can figure out another way, maybe even invent a new tool on the spot because they understand the fundamentals. The classic example people always bring up is Apollo 13, right?
Oh, yeah, making the CO2 filter.
Totally. They had to build a life-saving device using only the random junk they had available on that tiny spacecraft. There was no instruction manual for that specific problem. They had to go back to the first principles of chemistry, airflow, mechanics, and improvise a solution from scratch.
That kind of derivation, building from the ground up, it often demands a certain simplicity, doesn't it? Which leads us straight to Occam's razor.
Yes. The simplest explanation that fits the facts is the one most likely to be true. Or at least, it's the one you should test first.
Don't add unnecessary complexity.
Precisely. And this is super useful when we start thinking about the dangers of overfitting.
Overfitting? That sounds like a statistics term.
It comes from statistics and machine learning, but the concept applies everywhere. Overfitting is basically choosing an explanation or a model that's too complex for the data you have, usually because you're trying desperately to explain every single tiny blip or bit of noise, rather than looking for the underlying pattern.
Okay, give me an example outside of stats.
Think about online dating again. Let's say you had one bad date with someone who happened to dislike, I don't know, dogs. If you then narrow your search criteria to only include people who explicitly state they adore golden retrievers.
You're probably overfitting based on one data point.
Exactly. You're creating this super specific, maybe unnecessary rule based on a tiny piece of your history. You're making the hypothesis, my ideal partner must love golden retrievers. Way too complex.
Occam's razor would say.
Start simpler. Maybe just likes animals or even just leave it open. See what happens. Don't add complexity unless the evidence forces you to.
Or the classic medical example, right? You Google your symptoms.
Oh, yeah. And convince yourself you have some incredibly rare, complex, tropical disease you read about.
When Occam's razor and basic probability suggest you almost certainly just have a common cold.
Right. Overfitting the symptom data. Simplicity first. Start at the most likely least complex explanation.
Okay, so we're striving for simplicity, building from first principles. But even then, our view is always limited, isn't it? That brings us to the frame of reference.
This is absolutely fundamental, and it comes straight from physics, actually. It's core to Einstein's relativity.
How does it work in physics?
Well, imagine you're sitting on a train moving at, say, 100 miles per hour. You put your coffee cup down on the table in front of you.
Okay.
Relative to you, in your frame of reference,
Right.
that cup is perfectly still, zero velocity.
Makes sense.
But now imagine someone standing outside watching the train go past. From their frame of reference, outside the train, you and your coffee cup are both hurtling along at 100 miles per hour.
Right. Same event, totally different observations depending on where you are.
Exactly. Your measurements, your perception of reality literally change based on your frame of reference. There's no single true observation without specifying the frame.
And applying that metaphorically?
Yeah.
That's huge.
Profound. To even approach objectivity, you have to constantly be aware of your own frame. Your background, your mood, your current goals, your biases, they all shape how you see things.
It's like the lens you're looking through.
Precisely. And crucially, you can't just stop at recognizing your own frame. You have to actively seek out other frames of reference. Talk to people with different perspectives, different experiences, different positions.
So if you're trying to understand why a project failed in your company,
Need to hear from the engineers, the managers, the marketing team, maybe even the customers. Each one has a different frame, sees a different part of the picture. Without gathering those multiple perspectives, you're stuck just looking out the window of your own speeding train.
that need to see other perspectives really leads us right into the next big challenge. All the cognitive traps that actively prevent us from being objective. And one of the most subtle is how information gets presented to us in the first place. The concept of framing.
Framing is all about the packaging.
Yeah.
How you wrap up the information, it sets the context, and very often it dictates the immediate emotional reaction people have.
Like if a company wants to propose some big, expensive new initiative.
Right. They could frame it really positively. This is a groundbreaking opportunity to revolutionize the market. Sounds exciting, visionary.
Yeah, people leaning in.
Yeah. But what if they framed it more neutrally? Just stating the facts. This project will require allocating 50% of our annual R&D budget.
Suddenly sounds a lot riskier, more likely to get shot down.
Exactly. Same core facts,
Yeah.
potentially. But the frame changes the entire perception and, likely, the decision that follows.
The sources brought up a really stark, real-world example of this with news headlines after a police shooting back in 2015.
That was a powerful illustration. Depending on whether the headline focused on the dramatic outcome like officer shot during encounter, or the factual cause, something like police respond to wrong address, altercation ensues.
People took away completely different meanings.
Completely different narratives about who was at fault, how serious the underlying problem was. The frame essentially wrote the story before you even read the details.
And this framing often works through even more subtle means, right? Through nudging.
Yeah. Nudging is about influencing choices or behavior without actually forbidding anything or using force. It's gentle pushes in a certain direction. Word choice is a classic nudge.
Like in those studies about eyewitness testimony.
Exactly. If you ask witnesses how fast the cars were going when they contacted each other,
They give lower speed estimates.
lower estimates than if you ask how fast they were going when they smashed into each other. That one little verb change nudges their memory, their perception of the event's violence.
And we see nudges everywhere, don't we? Restaurants highlighting the chef's special.
Or putting the profitable items at eye level on the menu. Supermarkets arranging aisles to guide you past impulse buys. These are all subtle nudges designed to steer your decisions, often without you consciously processing it.
And these nudges, these frames, they often prey on another big bias, the availability bias.
Availability. This one's huge in the modern world. It's our brain's tendency to overestimate the importance or frequency of things that are easily recalled, things that are recent, vivid, or heavily reported.
If it's top of mind, it feels common.
Exactly. Even if statistically, it's quite rare.
This creates such a massive distortion field, doesn't it? You look at the actual data for something like, say, violent crime rates or maybe border crossings.
Right. The long-term data might show things are stable or even at historic lows in some cases.
But if the news and social media are constantly intensely covering incidents, highlighting dramatic cases.
Your brain registers it as happening all the time.
Yeah.
The availability heuristic kicks in. You end up fundamentally misjudging the actual prevalence because the examples are so readily available in your memory. The perception completely overrides the statistical reality.
And this gets amplified like crazy online because of the filter bubble and the echo chamber.
Oh, absolutely. These algorithms, they're designed for engagement, right? So they feed you more of what they think you already like or believe.
They learn your biases and reinforce them.
They literally filter out opposing views or information that might challenge your perspective.
Yeah.
You end up in this bubble where it seems like everyone agrees with you or that your viewpoint is the dominant one.
Which just makes the availability bias worse.
Exponentially worse. And it leads to this echo chamber effect where the same ideas just bounce around, getting louder and more extreme, increasing polarization. It makes genuine objectivity incredibly difficult.
So if you genuinely want to be wrong less, you have to consciously break out of that bubble. You have to actively seek out those different frames of reference we talked about.
You absolutely do. And that active search runs smack into probably the biggest internal hurdle we all face. Confirmation bias.
The big one.
It's our deeply ingrained tendency to seek out, interpret, and remember information in a way that confirms what we already believe. We actively avoid or dismiss stuff that challenges our views.
It feels good to be right, or to think we're right.
It does. It's probably a survival mechanism from our evolutionary past, but it's absolutely disastrous for clear thinking and objective decision-making.
And we see the really damaging historical effects of this in things like the Semmelweis reflex.
Poor Semmelweis. His story is such a tragic, perfect example of this reflex, the outright rejection of new, valid evidence just because it clashes with established beliefs or makes people uncomfortable.
Remind us of the details. 19th century Vienna, right?
Ignaz Semmelweis was a doctor who noticed a horrifying difference in death rates between two maternity wards in his hospital. In the ward where doctors delivered babies, mothers were dying from puerperal fever, childbed fever, at a shocking rate like 10%, sometimes higher. But in the adjacent ward, where midwives delivered, the death rate was much, much lower.
So he tried to figure out why.
He did, and he realized the key difference. The doctors often came straight from performing autopsies on diseased corpses to delivering babies without properly washing their hands. The midwives didn't do autopsies. So Semmelweis hypothesized that the doctors were carrying cadaverous particles on their hands. His solution was simple: mandatory hand washing with a chlorine solution between procedures.
And it worked.
Instantly and dramatically. The death rate in the doctor's ward plummeted to match the midwives. Clear empirical proof.
Well, everyone adopted it immediately, right?
Nope. Tragically, no. His colleagues, the established medical community, largely rejected his findings. Not because they had better data, but because they were deeply offended.
Offended?
Offended by the implication that they, the educated gentlemen doctors, could possibly be the cause of death. That they were unclean. It contradicted their self-image, their established paradigm.
Confirmation bias protecting their ego.
Exactly. They clung to their old ways. Semmelweis was ridiculed, lost his job, and eventually died in an asylum. His life-saving discovery ignored for decades. It's a brutal example of the Semmelweis reflex.
And it wasn't an isolated case. You see the same pattern with Wegener and continental drift.
Same story, different field. Alfred Wegener proposed in the early 20th century that continents moved. He had tons of evidence matching fossils, geological formations across oceans.
The puzzle pieces fitting together?
Right, but the established geologists rejected it for like 40 years. Why? Confirmation bias again. Their paradigm was a static Earth. And they focused on the fact that Wegener couldn't perfectly explain the mechanism, how exactly the continents plowed through the ocean floor.
So they dismissed the evidence because the explanation wasn't complete.
They preferred clinging to the familiar, even though it didn't fit the growing evidence, rather than accept a radical new idea that challenged their core beliefs. They even invented flimsy alternative explanations like ancient land bridges.
Wow. So, okay, these biases, confirmation bias, the Semmelweis reflex, they're powerful. How do we actively fight against this sort of defensive, almost tribal thinking in ourselves?
We need specific mental tactics.
Yeah.
One really useful one is consciously trying to find the third story in any conflict.
The third story.
Yeah. In any disagreement, you've got your story, the other person has their story. Both are usually biased, focused on intent, blame, feelings. The third story is the one an impartial observer, like a mediator, would tell. It focuses just on the facts, the sequence of events, the observable behaviors, without the interpretation or blame.
Trying to step outside your own emotional frame.
Exactly. Just articulating that neutral, factual account can often diffuse defensiveness and open up understanding. Another powerful technique is to actively play the devil's advocate.
Argue against yourself.
Or more specifically, force yourself to articulate the other side's argument, not as a straw man, but as strongly and convincingly as possible. This is where Charlie Munger's rule is just golden.
What's Munger's rule?
He says, I never allow myself to have an opinion on anything that I don't know the other side's argument better than they do.
Wow. Better than they do. That's a high bar.
It is. It forces you to really grapple with their underlying reasons, their strongest points, not just the weakest ones you can easily knock down. It combats confirmation bias head on.
And when we're looking at other people's actions, trying to understand why they did something potentially negative.
That's where Hanlon's razor comes in. It's a fantastic heuristic. Never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by carelessness.
Or incompetence, or just being busy or misinformed.
Exactly. If your colleague drops the ball on a project task, your gut reaction might be anger, assuming they're lazy or trying to sabotage you. Hanlon's razor forces you to pause and consider simpler, less malicious explanations first. Maybe they were overloaded. Maybe they misunderstood the instructions. Maybe they just forgot.
Assume ignorance or error before assuming bad intent.
Right. It encourages seeking the most respectful interpretation MRI, of someone's behavior until you have actual evidence to the contrary. It prevents unnecessary conflict and cynicism.
So these models mongers deep understanding. Hand lens razor, assuming good faith, they help us be wrong, less not just by knowing more facts, but by fundamentally changing how we interpret the facts and interact with others.
Precisely. They are tools for correcting the biases in the interpretation engine itself.
Okay, moving on from the crucial task of being objective, let's talk about efficiency. How do we actually spend our limited time wisely? There's a great saying that sums up the core challenge here. If you chase two rabbits, both will escape.
That captures it perfectly. It highlights the immense cost of context switching.
What exactly is context switching in this sense?
It's trying to juggle multiple tasks that require deep focus or a significant cognitive load. Our brains, well, they're just not designed to truly multitask on complex things. We can maybe walk and chew gum, but we can't effectively write a detailed report and simultaneously participate meaningfully in a conference call.
So when you try, you're just rapidly switching your attention back and forth.
Exactly. And each switch isn't instantaneous. There's a mental cost, a kind of reloading time where your brain has to pull the context of the previous task back into working memory.
So that quick email check while you're deep in thought on something else.
It's often not quick at all. Studies suggest it can take, 15, 20 minutes, sometimes even longer, to fully regain your previous level of focus after an interruption. You're constantly losing momentum and wasting mental energy just reorienting yourself.
So chasing two rabbits means you're less likely to catch either one effectively.
Precisely. The key then is knowing which single rabbit is worth chasing right now. And that's where prioritization tools become essential. The Eisenhower decision matrix is a classic for a reason.
Ah, yes, the urgent important grid. Can you break that down quickly?
Sure. It's a simple 2x2 box. You categorize tasks based on two dimensions. Urgency, does it need immediate attention? And importance, does it contribute significantly to your long-term goals and values?
Okay, so the four quadrants are.
Quadrant first is urgent and important. These are your crises, your genuine deadlines, problems that need immediate action. You have to deal with these now.
Got it. Fires to put out.
Quadrant 3 is important but not urgent. This is the magic quadrant. Strategic planning, deep work on major projects, learning new skills, building relationships, exercise, preventative maintenance. These are the things that drive long-term success and well-being.
But they don't shout for attention.
Exactly. Quadrant third is urgent but not important. These are often interruptions, lots of emails, some meetings, requests from other people that feel pressing to them but don't actually align with their core goals. These are major distractions.
Time thieves.
Yep. And finally, quadrant third is not urgent and not important. This is busy work, mindless scrolling, time-wasting activities. These should just be eliminated as much as possible.
So the big insight from the Eisenhower matrix is?
You need to ruthlessly protect time for quadrant 2. The important, non-urgent stuff. That's where the real leverage lies. The huge danger is that quadrant 3, the urgent but unimportant stuff, is loud. It constantly demands your attention.
The tyranny of the urgent.
Totally. It feels productive because it's busy, but it pulls you away from the deep, strategic work in quadrant 2 that actually moves the needle on your most important goals.
So you have to consciously prioritize importance over urgency. How do you do that practically?
Well, things like time blocking are crucial. Literally scheduling appointments with yourself in your calendar for specific quadrant 2 tasks, 9/11 a.m., work on Project X strategy doc, and treating that block as seriously as a meeting with your boss.
Building a fence around your deep work time.
Exactly. You have to defend it against those quadrant 3 intrusions. Okay, so once you prioritize what to work on, every choice you make still has a hidden cost, doesn't it?
Ah, you're talking about opportunity cost.
The big one. It's the value of the next best alternative you gave up when you made a choice. It's not just what you did choose, but what you didn't choose.
So if I spend 2 hours watching a movie,
The opportunity cost isn't just the price of the ticket. It's the value of whatever else you could have done with those 2 hours. Maybe that was 2 hours of working on your side hustle or exercising or spending time with family. You compare the value of the movie to the value of the best foregone alternative.
this becomes really critical for big life decisions, right? Like quitting a job to start a business.
Absolutely. People often focus only on the explicit costs, the money needed for startup capital, office rent, equipment, etc.
The direct cash outlays.
Right. But they often completely ignore the implicit costs, the opportunity costs. The biggest one is usually the salary, the benefits, the bonuses you're giving up from your stable corporate job. That's a massive, often guaranteed income stream you're sacrificing.
Plus, maybe investment returns you could have earned if you hadn't sunk your savings into the business.
Exactly. Calculating the full opportunity cost gives you a much more realistic picture of the true sacrifice involved and helps you make a more informed decision. It forces you to weigh the potential upside against the very real value of what you're leaving behind.
Okay, so you've chosen your high-leverage task, you understand the opportunity cost, but then you run into another limit, right? You can't just keep pouring effort in indefinitely and expect the same results.
No, that's where the law of diminishing returns kicks in. This is fundamental. After a certain point, adding more effort, more resources, more time to something yields progressively smaller increases in output or quality.
The first hour you spend studying for a test probably helps a lot.
Massive gains, yeah.
Yeah.
You learn the core concepts. The second hour, still pretty good.
But the 10th hour?
The marginal benefit, the extra learning you get from that 10th hour is likely much, much smaller than what you got from the first hour. You're hitting diminishing returns.
The sources mention an example with clinical study reports.
Yeah, that was a great one. An analysis found that these complex reports went through multiple rounds of review, sometimes up to 6 drafts. But the data show that the quality of the report didn't actually improve significantly after the second draft.
So drafts 3, 4, 5, 6.
Were essentially wasted effort, classic diminishing returns. The time and resources spent yielded almost no additional value. You reach a point where the benefit of one more hour or one more draft is less than the cost of that effort.
And this applies to enjoyment too, right? That's the law of diminishing utility.
Same principle, different context.
Yeah.
Utility is just the satisfaction or enjoyment you get from something. The first slice of pizza after you haven't eaten all day.
Amazing, high utility.
Incredible utility.
Yeah.
The second slice, still pretty good.
The 6th slice.
Ugh. The enjoyment, the utility you get from that 6th slice is probably close to zero, maybe even negative. You're full, maybe feeling a bit sick. Diminishing, then negative utility.
And if you push way past diminishing returns, you can actually start going backwards, right? Negative returns.
Yes. This isn't just wasted effort. It's effort that makes things worse. It's actively counterproductive. We see this tragically sometimes in youth sports.
Like pitchers throwing year-round.
Exactly. Early specialization, intense, year-round training without adequate rest. It can lead to overuse injuries like Tommy John surgery in teenagers, injuries that used to be mainly seen in adult professionals. The overinvestment in training leads to physical breakdown, negative returns.
Or mentally pulling multiple all-nighters trying to cram for an exam.
Terrible idea. Sleep deprivation massively degrades cognitive function. Your ability to learn, remember, and perform complex tasks plummets. After the first all-nighter, maybe you gain a little, but by the third, you're likely performing worse than if you'd just gotten some sleep. Negative returns.
So recognizing that point of diminishing returns is crucial.
It's a signal. As soon as you feel returns diminishing significantly on task A, you should immediately reassess. What's the opportunity cost? Could this hour be spent on task B where the returns are still high? You constantly need to pivot your effort towards where it provides the most leverage.
This all seems to loop back to the ultimate resource we're managing, time itself. You mentioned Bill Gates' observation.
Yeah, it's such a great insight. He said something like, people consistently overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 10 years.
We focus too much on the short term, not enough on the long game.
Exactly. But if you have a clear North Star, a guiding long-term vision or goal, then the power of small, consistent progress over time is just immense. It's like compound interest.
Little bits adding up.
Right. Small, regular deposits don't look like much day to day, but over 10, 20 years, the compounding effect creates staggering wealth. It's the same with compounding your ability.
How does that work?
Small, steady efforts, learning a new skill bit by bit, consistently nurturing important relationships, making small improvements to your systems. They might seem insignificant in the moment, but compounded over a decade, they lead to massive, often unexpected, levels of expertise, connection, and success. Results are almost invisible day to day, but undeniable when you look back. It's the superpower of persistence aligned with a long-term vision.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. We've talked about thinking clearly, using time wisely, but the world is messy, right? Things go wrong. We need to grapple with risk and the often unpredictable consequences of our actions in complex systems.
Absolutely. And to navigate this, we actually need a sort of defensive mindset. We start with a concept that sounds really negative, but is actually incredibly practical, Murphy's Law.
Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. Sounds pretty fatalistic.
It sounds like it, but think of it less as a prediction and more as a crucial design principle, especially for anything important. It's a prompt for preparedness.
Oh.
If you're designing something critical, a spacecraft system, a piece of medical equipment, a financial process, Murphy's Law forces you to anticipate potential failure points. If a seal can leak, what happens? If the power can fail, is there a backup? If the user can misunderstand the instructions, how do we make it foolproof? You assume failure will happen eventually, and you design the system to be safe or resilient when it does.
So it's about building in redundancy and fail-safes.
Exactly. It's proactive pessimism used for defensive design. Don't hope for the best, plan for the worst.
A lot of risk comes not just from simple failures, but from the fact that actions in complex systems ripple outwards in ways we don't foresee, unintended consequences.
This is a huge source of problems.
Yeah.
You implement a policy or make a change with one specific goal in mind, but because systems are interconnected, it triggers a cascade of other effects you never planned for, some good, some bad.
Like the example of U.S. farm subsidies.
That's a classic. The intended goal was laudable: stabilize crop prices, support farmers. But a major unintended consequence was massive overproduction of corn because it was heavily subsidized.
So there was way too much corn.
Way too much cheap corn, which then led directly to the invention and widespread adoption of high-fructose corn syrup as a cheap sweetener for everything.
Which arguably had massive unintended consequences for public health, obesity rates, diabetes.
Precisely. A well-intentioned agricultural policy inadvertently reshapes the nation's diet and health profile in ways nobody predicted at the time.
We see this kind of systemic vulnerability really clearly when we talk about shared resources, right? The tragedy of the commons.
Yes, this is a fundamental model for understanding why resources that are open to everyone are so easily depleted.
Explain the basic idea.
Imagine a common pasture, open to all villagers to graze their cows, like the actual Boston Common back in the day. Each individual farmer thinks, if I add one more cow to my herd grazing on the common land, I get all the profit from that extra cow.
Makes sense from their perspective.
But the cost of that extra cow, grazing the slight depletion of the grass, is shared among all the villagers. So my personal gain is large, my personal share of the cost is tiny.
So every rational farmer adds another cow.
And another. Until the shared pasture, the commons, is completely overgrazed, depleted, and useless for everyone. Individual rational self-interest leads to collective ruin.
And this isn't just about cows and grass.
Not at all. It applies everywhere. Overfishing depleting global fish stocks, individuals polluting air or water because the cost feels diffused, antibiotic resistance growing because of collective overuse, even spam email degrading the usefulness of the entire email system for everybody.
It's a recurring pattern when you have a shared resource without clear rules or ownership.
Exactly. And closely related to this is the free rider problem.
How is that different?
The free rider is someone who benefits from a collective good or resource without contributing their fair share to maintaining it. They ride for free on the efforts of others.
Like someone who doesn't pay taxes but still uses public roads and schools.
That's one angle. But a really critical example today is in public health, specifically with herd immunity and vaccines.
How does herd immunity work?
When a high enough percentage of a population is vaccinated against a contagious disease, typically like 90–95% for something like measles, the disease can't spread easily. It hits dead ends. This creates a protective umbrella herd immunity that shields everyone, including those who can't be vaccinated, like infants too young, or people with compromised immune systems.
So the collective vaccination protects the vulnerable few.
Right. Now, the free rider is the individual who, perhaps due to misinformation or personal belief, chooses not to vaccinate themselves or their children, but still benefits from the safety provided by everyone else who did get vaccinated. They're enjoying the low risk of disease without contributing to the collective effort that creates that low risk.
And the danger is when too many people free ride.
The vaccination rate drops below that critical threshold. The herd immunity umbrella collapses. And then you see outbreaks of diseases we thought we'd conquered, like measles, often hitting the most vulnerable people the hardest. The free riding, when widespread, destroys the collective good it relied upon.
Okay, so systems are complex, prone to unintended consequences, tragedies of the commons, free riders. When things go wrong, we often turn to data to figure out what happened. But data itself can be misleading, right?
Oh, massively. We absolutely have to be armed against statistical manipulation and common fallacies. The old phrase, lie, damned lies in statistics, exists for a reason. The most fundamental trap is probably Correlation does not imply causation.
Just because two things happen together, one after the other, doesn't mean the first one caused the second one.
Exactly. This fallacy is everywhere. People get a flu shot, then they happen to get sick a week later with a cold. They blame the shot. The flu shot gave me the flu.
But it's just correlation.
It's pure correlation. The confounding factor is that they got the shot during peak cold and flu season. They were likely exposed to a cold virus anyway. Or maybe they were already incubating it. To prove the shot caused the illness, you'd need a properly controlled experiment comparing illness rates in vaccinated versus unvaccinated groups, isolating that variable. Anecdotes about timing prove nothing about causation.
And sometimes people manipulate data, maybe even unintentionally, to find a causal link that isn't there, like the Texas sharpshooter fallacy.
Right. Imagine someone firing a shotgun randomly at the side of a barn, then walking up and drawing targets around the tightest clusters of bullet holes, claiming they're a great shot.
They define the success criteria after seeing the random results.
Precisely. In research, this is like looking at a whole bunch of data, finding some random correlation that looks interesting, and then creating a hypothesis after the fact to explain just that finding, ignoring all the data points that didn't fit. It's also related to p-hacking, where researchers run tons of statistical tests and only report the ones that happen to show a significant result by chance.
So how do you guard against that?
One key is that researchers should pre-specify their hypothesis and their main outcome measures before they collect or analyze the data. You can't move the target after you shoot. And rigorous experiments use blinding.
Blinding, meaning the participants don't know if they're getting the real treatment or a placebo.
Right, that's single blinding. It prevents the participants' expectations from influencing the results. But even better is double blinding.
Where the researchers administering the treatment also don't know who's getting what.
Exactly. This prevents observer expectancy bias, where the researcher's own hopes or biases might subtly influence how they interact with participants or interpret subjective outcomes. If nobody involved knows who got the real drug until the end, the results are much more objective.
Okay, so blinding helps within the experiment. But what about who gets into the experiment or survey in the first place? We need to ask, who's missing?
Crucial question. This leads us to survivorship bias. This happens when we only look at the things that survived some process and draw conclusions from them, forgetting about all the things that didn't make it.
Like studying successful companies to see what makes them succeed.
Classic example. If you only survey CEOs of currently thriving companies, you might conclude that taking huge risks is the key to success. But you're completely ignoring all the companies that took huge risks and failed spectacularly. They're not around to be surveyed. The sample is biased towards the survivors, giving you a skewed picture of reality.
Or surveying current employees about job satisfaction.
You'll likely get a rosier picture than reality because all the really unhappy employees have probably already quit. Their negative opinions are missing from your data set. You have to actively seek out the non-survivors or account for their absence.
So assuming we have a decent representative sample, how do we handle large amounts of data responsibly?
Well, the foundation is the law of large numbers. This basically says that as you collect more and more observations or run more trials, the average result you get from your sample will get closer and closer to the true underlying average or probability.
More data leads to more reliability.
Generally, yes. It's why a poll of 1,000 people is much more reliable than asking your 3 best friends. This law underpins almost all reliable statistical inference.
And this is why things like confidence intervals and error bars are so important when reporting results.
Absolutely non-negotiable. Thanks to the central limit theorem, we know that if you take lots of samples, the averages of those samples will tend to follow a predictable pattern, usually a bell curve. This allows us to calculate a margin of error or a confidence interval around our result.
So if a poll says candidate A has 58% support,
that single number is almost useless without context. Is it 58% plus or minus 2%? That's a pretty solid lead. Or is it 58% plus or minus 15%?
then it's basically meaningless. Could be anywhere from 43% to 73%.
Exactly. The error bar tells you the range of uncertainty. Without it, you have no idea how seriously to take the number. Responsible reporting always includes measures of uncertainty.
Okay, so we rely on averages and large numbers. But what about the extreme events, the things that don't fit the nice bell curve?
Now we're getting into the really tricky stuff. Many complex systems, financial markets, weather patterns, project timelines, even the severity of pandemics, often don't follow that nice, predictable bell curve or normal distribution. They follow fat-tailed distributions.
Fat tails. What does that mean?
It means the tails of the distribution curve, representing extreme outcomes, are much fatter, meaning much more probable than a normal distribution would predict. In a normal bell curve, truly massive deviations from the average are incredibly rare. In a fat-tailed distribution, extreme events happen far more often than you'd expect.
These are the black swans.
Exactly. Black swans are those highly improbable, high-impact events that nobody saw coming, but which seem almost obvious in hindsight. Think the 2008 financial crisis, or the scale of the COVID-19 pandemic. Standard risk models based on normal distributions completely failed to anticipate their possibility or magnitude because the tails weren't fat enough.
So you can't really predict black swans based on past data.
Not reliably, no. Their defining characteristic is their unexpectedness. So the only real defense is not prediction, but antifragility, making sure your systems, your finances, your plans are robust enough to survive an unexpected massive shock.
And maybe actively thinking about the unthinkable.
Yes, that's where scenario analysis comes in. You have to force yourself and your team to brainstorm wildly unlikely, potentially catastrophic scenarios, things far outside the normal range of expectations, and think through how you would respond. It's about building resilience to the unknown unknowns by imagining them first.
All right, we've got tools for objectivity, for managing time, for understanding risk. How do we pull all this together when facing really complex decisions? We need to move beyond the basics, right? Like the simple pro-con list.
Oh, definitely. The standard pro-con list is better than nothing, maybe, but it's deeply flawed.
Why? What's wrong with it?
Well, first, it implicitly treats every pro and every con as having equal weight, which is rarely true. One major con might completely outweigh 10 minor pros. Second, it often limits you to just two options, do it versus don't do it, when there might be many alternatives. And third, it doesn't handle interdependencies between factors well.
So we need something more robust, like cost-benefit analysis, CBA.
Exactly. CBA is a much more systematic and quantitative approach. You try to estimate the total costs and total benefits of a decision, usually in monetary terms, over a specific time frame.
And the key difference here is incorporating that idea of the discount rate, right?
Absolutely critical. We touched on opportunity cost and time value of money earlier. The discount rate formally brings that in. Because a dollar today is worth more than a dollar promised next year, due to inflation, investment potential, uncertainty, we need to discount future costs and benefits back to their present value to make a fair comparison.
So a benefit of $1 million arriving 20 years from now is worth much less in today's terms than $1 million arriving next year.
Correct. And the choice of which discount rate to use is hugely influential. A high discount rate makes future benefits, like long-term environmental protection, seem less valuable today, potentially favoring projects with quick payoffs, but long-term costs.
Whereas a low discount rate gives more weight to the future.
Making long-term investments or avoiding long-term damages look much more attractive. The choice of discount rate can literally flip the outcome of a CBA from positive to negative or vice versa.
Which means you can't just rely on one number.
Never. You absolutely must perform a sensitivity analysis.
What does that involve?
You rerun the cost-benefit calculation using a range of plausible discount rates, say, from a low 3% to a high 7%. You see how sensitive the final result, the net benefit, is to that single assumption.
So if the project only looks good using the absolute lowest, most optimistic discount rate,
you know it's a risky proposition. Its viability hinges entirely on that one favorable assumption. Sensitivity analysis reveals the key vulnerabilities and uncertainties in your analysis.
Okay, so CBA with sensitivity analysis is a better framework, but not all decisions are created equal in terms of consequences, are they?
Not at all. And Jeff Bezos made a really useful distinction here between type 1 and type 2 decisions.
What's the difference?
Type 1 decisions are, as he put it, one-way doors. They are consequential, hard, or impossible to reverse. Think getting married, selling your company, launching a flagship product that defines your brand. These require slow, careful deliberation, lots of analysis, maybe consensus. You walk through that door, you can't easily walk back.
And type 2.
Type 2 decisions are two-way doors. They're reversible. If you make a mistake, you can backtrack without catastrophic consequences. Maybe trying out a new marketing approach on a small scale, testing a new software tool, reorganizing an internal team process. These should be made quickly, often by individuals or small groups, with an expectation that some will be wrong, but you can course-correct easily.
What's the danger here?
The big danger, especially in large organizations, is treating all decisions as type 1. Everything gets bogged down in endless meetings, analysis paralysis, layers of approval. It kills speed, agility, and innovation. Recognizing when a decision is safely type 2 and empowering people to just make it and iterate is crucial.
So for those really complex type 1 decisions or even type 2's lots of uncertainty, we need ways to map out the possibilities, like decision trees.
Decision trees are fantastic for structuring choices that involve multiple stages, uncertainty, and probabilistic outcomes. You literally draw it out.
How does it work?
You start with a decision node, a square. Branches come out representing your choices. Each choice might lead to a chance node, a circle, where different outcomes can occur, each with an estimated probability, like a 60% chance of success, 40% chance of failure. Each final outcome at the end of a path has a value associated with it, usually a monetary value.
And you calculate the expected value of each initial choice.
Exactly. You work backwards from the end, calculating the weighted average value at each chance node, probability times outcome value. This helps you identify the initial decision path that has the highest overall expected value. It makes complex, multi-stage problems much more tractable.
But not all costs and benefits are easily measured in money, right? What about things like stress or hassle or reputation?
That's where the concept of utility values comes in, taking decision trees to the next level. Utility is a measure of overall satisfaction or preference, which can include non-monetary factors.
So you're trying to quantify the unquantifiable.
Sort of.
Yeah.
You assign a numerical value, a utility score, to different outcomes based on how much you value them, considering everything. For instance, choosing between two job offers. Job A pays slightly more, but involves a horrible commute and a toxic boss. Job B pays less, but offers great work-life balance and a supportive team.
A simple financial analysis might favor Job A.
Right. But if you incorporate the negative utility of the stress, the commute time, the potential health impacts from Job A, and the positive utility of the flexibility and happiness from Job B, the overall expected utility might strongly favor Job B, even with the lower salary. It allows you to bring subjective, intangible factors into a structured, quantitative decision framework.
This structured thinking helps us deal with what we know, but also what we don't know. Which brings us to Donald Rumsfeld's famous quadrant.
Ah, yes, the knowns and unknowns. It's a really useful framework for thinking about risk and information.
Break it down for us.
Okay, 4 categories. First, known knowns. These are the things we know that we know. Facts, data, established certainties. Pretty straightforward. Known unknowns. These are the risks we are aware of, but we don't know the specifics. We don't know how competitors will react, or exactly how long the project will take, or what the inflation rate will be next year. These are the identifiable gaps in our knowledge.
And we can usually address these.
We can try. We mitigate known unknowns through research, contingency planning, building in buffers, basically, targeted efforts to reduce that specific uncertainty, de-risking.
Then comes the tricky part.
Right. Third, unknown knowns, things we mistakenly think we know but are actually wrong about. Hidden assumptions, flawed models. These are dangerous because we're acting with false confidence.
And finally, the scariest one.
Unknowns. Unknowns. These are the risks we don't even know exist, the things we don't know that we don't know, the true black swans, the completely unexpected disruptions that come out of left field.
Like Rumsfeld was talking about in the context of terrorism or warfare.
Exactly. You can't directly plan for unknown unknowns because you don't know what they are. The only defense is, again, building general resilience, flexibility, adaptability, and maybe using techniques like that extreme scenario analysis we mentioned, actively trying to imagine completely unexpected futures to uncover potential blind spots.
So, navigating all this complexity, making strategic choices, we also have to consider how our past choices affect our future options. Path dependence.
Yeah, path dependence is the idea that the choices you make today constrain the choices available to you tomorrow. History matters.
Like investing heavily in one type of technology.
Right. If your whole company is built around, say, COBOL mainframes, switching to a modern cloud architecture isn't a simple flip of a switch. Your past investments create inertia and make certain future paths much harder or more expensive than others. You're locked in to some extent.
So the counter strategy is consciously preserving optionality.
Exactly. This means actively making choices that keep future options open, rather than shutting them down. It's about maintaining flexibility.
Like what?
It could be maintaining a healthy cash reserve, a rainy day fund, so you can weather unexpected shocks or seize sudden opportunities. It could be continuously learning new skills so you're not tied to one specific job or industry. It could be designing systems with open standards so you're not locked into one vendor. It's basically buying insurance on your future freedom of action.
Okay, let's talk about conflict. Sometimes the best strategic move seems to be not engaging. You mentioned the movie War Games.
Yes. That movie has such a brilliant strategic lesson embedded in it. The AI supercomputer, Joshua, runs simulation after simulation of global thermonuclear war between the US and Soviet Union.
Trying to find a winning strategy.
Right. And it explores every possible scenario, every tactic. But ultimately, it discovers that every single path leads to the same outcome. Mutually assured destruction, MAD. Nobody wins. Everyone loses catastrophically.
So the computer concludes.
A strange game. The only winning move is not to play. Sometimes, in conflicts where any engagement guarantees massive losses for everyone involved, the smartest strategy is simply refusal, disengagement.
And this applies way beyond nuclear war, right?
Absolutely. Think about getting drawn into pointless arguments online with trolls, or pouring emotional energy and resources into intractable family feuds, or business rivalries where there's no real upside, just escalating costs and collateral damage. Sometimes preserving your resources, your sanity, your focus for battles that actually matter is the winning move. Don't play the game if the game itself is rigged for mutual loss.
But what if you have to engage? What if you're the smaller player facing a big entrenched opponent?
Then you can't play their game. You can't win a war of attrition against a larger foe with more resources. You need asymmetric tactics. You need guerrilla warfare, metaphorically speaking.
Exploit their weaknesses. Use speed and surprise.
And critically, exploit their tendency to fight the last war. Large established entities, armies, corporations often become complacent, relying on the strategies and structures that worked for them in the past. They get stuck in their ways.
Like generals preparing for trench warfare when tanks and airplanes have changed everything.
It's exactly.
Yeah.
Or think about business history. IBM dominated the mainframe era, but initially missed the personal computer revolution because they were still thinking like a mainframe company. Microsoft dominated the PC era, but largely missed the smartphone revolution because their thinking was locked into the desktop paradigm.
So the smaller, nimbler player
Can often win by introducing a completely new way of competing, exploiting the blind spots and outdated assumptions of the incumbent. They change the rules of the game. That's how disruption often happens. Hashtag tag tag outro.
Wow. Okay, we have really covered a huge amount of ground today on this super thinking journey. We've tried to pack your mental toolkit with some incredibly powerful models from really all over the place.
We really have. We started with that foundation of anti-fragility, aiming to be wrong less by spotting unforced errors, by going back to first principles, and keeping things simple with Occam's razor.
Then we tackled those cognitive traps head on, recognizing the power of framing, the danger of the Semmelweis reflex blocking new ideas, and the distorting effects of the filter bubble.
We looked at spending time wisely, focusing on that crucial quadrant 2 in the Eisenhower matrix, always remembering the opportunity cost of our choices, and respecting the law of diminishing returns.
Then into the world of risk. Using Murphy's Law defensively, understanding systemic issues like the tragedy of the commons and demanding statistical rigor knowing correlation isn't causation, demanding error bars, and watching out for survivorship bias.
And finally, upgrading our actual decision-making process. Moving beyond pro-con lists to proper cost-benefit analysis using the discount rate, structuring complexity with decision trees and utility values, knowing the difference between type 1 and type 2 choices, and thinking strategically about optionality versus path dependence.
So the models are there now, they're laid out, hopefully they're starting to make sense in your head, ready to be picked up and used.
But, and this is the critical part, right? True mastery, really becoming a super thinker, doesn't come just from knowing these models exist. It comes from practice. Continuous, conscious, deliberate application in your daily life, in your work, and how you interpret the world.
Using the tools until they become second nature.
Exactly. And, that brings us to maybe a final thought to leave you with. If you look back at all these different models we've discussed, from Munger demanding you argue the other side better than they can, to actively seeking diverse frames of reference, to running sensitivity analyses on your assumptions, to needing scenario planning for the unknown unknowns. There's a common thread, isn't there?
What's the thread?
They all point towards the same fundamental practice, the absolute necessity of questioning your own assumptions, challenging your own certainty, and actively seeking out perspectives that contradict your own. The ultimate super thinking journey isn't really about just accumulating more knowledge or more models in your toolkit.
It's about
deliberately building a mental framework that forces you to distrust your own initial conclusions. To recognize that your intuition, your gut feeling, while valuable, is also profoundly biased. True superthinking requires cultivating a healthy skepticism, especially towards your own beliefs, and constantly actively seeking objective challenges to them. That's the real upgrade.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be cracking open a really interesting set of sources focused on using foundational concepts for, well, better strategic thinking. Our mission today, it's pretty simple, but I think high leverage. We're exploring what are called super mental models. Think of them as these high-level intellectual building blocks. They cut across fields like physics, economics, psychology, all to sharpen your everyday decision making. Yeah, imagine like trying to tackle a huge spreadsheet just using addition. I mean, you could get there eventually, right? But be painfully slow, super prone to errors. Knowing the higher level concept like multiplication, or in our case, the right mental model, well, that's what unlocks what the sources call super thinking. These models let you reason about really complex stuff faster and at a higher level.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating, I think, is that we're deliberately ignoring the sort of jurisdictional boundaries between different fields here. We're not just learning jargon from one area. It's more about recognizing patterns. I mean, why should an idea like comparative advantage only apply to economics between nations? It totally applies to your team, your career, maybe even how your family organizes things. We're aiming to grab the best big ideas from all disciplines and just apply them broadly.
Okay, makes sense.
So for today's deep dive, we're zeroing in on three main areas. First up, how we can deal with conflict and influence situations more effectively. Second, unlocking potential both in ourselves and in others, building those high-performing groups. And finally, how to flex strategic market power out there in the competitive world.
Okay, let's dig into that first part then. Dealing with conflict, adversarial situations. The sources immediately point us towards game theory. Using this idea of a game, it's basically a simplified conflict where you can sort of quantify the outcomes. And the bedrock model here, of course, is the prisoner's dilemma.
Right, the classic.
Yeah, most people have probably heard of the setup, the payoff matrix. You've got two criminals, A and B, caught, held separately. Now, the individually rational choice, no matter what the other person does, seems to be betray them. If you betray and they stay quiet, you walk free 0 years. If you both betray, you each get, say, 5 years. That's still better than the 10 years if you stay quiet and they betray you. So in that single one-off game, betrayal looks like the smart, self-interested move.
But, and this is a key strategic point for you listening,
Yeah.
it makes you wonder, right, why doesn't everyone just betray everyone else constantly? Because that scenario, where both people make the individually rational choice betraying, actually leads to a worse outcome for both of them. They both get 5 years instead maybe 1 year if they'd cooperated. The really critical insight comes when the game is iterated, when it's played over and over and the players know they're going to interact again.
Okay, so that repetition changes the calculation. How many times do you need to play for cooperation to start making sense?
Well, it's less about a specific number of rounds and more about what's called the shadow of the future, basically the expectation that you'll interact again. If you know you'll need that person's cooperation tomorrow or next week or next year, then the quick win you get from betraying them today, well, it gets dwarfed by the potential long-term loss. Loss of reputation, loss of future trust. So in real-life business, politics, even personal relationships, that reputation cost actually makes cooperation the rational long-term strategy, even if it feels a bit risky in the moment.
Okay, that makes sense. It shifts us then from just pure rational calculation and conflict towards psychological influence. If conflict is about payoffs, how do we pivot to persuasion, where the levers aren't just logic, but, depth psychology? That brings us to Cialdini's models, right?
Absolutely. And the first big psychological lever you see everywhere is reciprocity. We just feel this deep-seated obligation to give back when we receive something. It's why places that are really optimized for influence, maybe like certain high-end stores or definitely casinos, give away free things, a drink, a small gift. They're activating that inherent social trigger, that need you feel to return the favor.
Right, like the free samples at the supermarket.
Exactly. Another incredibly powerful one is social proof. The idea that we're basically wired to follow the crowd. We look to others' actions to figure out what we should do.
Yeah.
But this one, it can be really dangerous if you misuse it. There's this really striking example from the Petrified Forest National Park. The rangers were trying to stop people from stealing bits of petrified wood, right? So they put up signs using social proof. They basically said something like, many past visitors have removed petrified wood, trying to show it was a serious problem. But what happened? Theft tripled. They accidentally signaled that stealing wood was actually a common, almost normal behavior. They used the power of social proof, but the negative framing turned what is happening into what people felt permission to do.
Wow, that backfired spectacularly. Okay, this next one feels really important too. The difference between social norms and market norms. These sound like completely different ways humans interact. Like if I ask a coworker to help me out with something as a favor, that's a social norm, right? Based on friendship, goodwill. But the second I offer them, say, $50 to do the same task, boom, I've switched it entirely over to a market norm. It's transactional.
And crucially, that switch can be, for all practical purposes, irreversible. That's the big warning from our sources. You have to be incredibly careful about bringing money or explicit market exchanges into areas where social norms, reciprocity and community feeling are already doing the work. Once you undermine that social bond by making it about a calculation time versus money, the relationship itself or the team culture might be permanently changed. You can't easily just switch back.
That sounds like a huge potential pitfall, especially for maybe startups or nonprofits that really rely on that initial goodwill and mission-driven energy. So if you're a manager or a founder and you realize you've maybe accidentally poisoned that well by introducing market norms, is there any way back? Or is it just damaged goods?
It's really tough because once the market norm is established, people start evaluating the exchange purely on its transactional value. If your friend agrees to babysit for $15 an hour this week, next week they might say no because they found someone paying $20. The friendship element is suddenly secondary to the rate. If it stayed a social favor, the negotiation would be about like, are you free or could you help me out to try and repair it? Well, it usually takes significant non-monetary gestures, really thoughtful gifts, offering substantial support in return, basically trying to rebuild the social connection and signal that it's not just transactional anymore. It's a slow, difficult process.
Okay, let's shift gears completely now. Moving away from external conflict and influence, let's look inwards. How do we unlock people's potential? How do we build these really high-performing groups, what the sources sometimes call 10X teams? And there's a great story they use, the 2004 Argentina Olympic battle.
Then come the infantry. They take the territory the commandos captured, and they start building the first repeatable processes. They're crucial for scaling up that initial success. And finally, you get the police. Their job is to maintain stability, build economies of scale, enforce standards, ensure compliance, and often, frankly, they dislike change because their focus is consistency and predictability.
So if I'm, say, a founder, and my company is growing from maybe 30 people to 300, which shift is usually the hardest? From commando to infantry or infantry to police? And why are those police types, who sometimes get a bad rap for being bureaucratic, actually so vital?
Yeah, that transition from the infantry stage to needing the police function, that's almost always the most painful culturally, because you're asking the original pioneers, the commandos and early infantry who thrived on flexibility and improvisation to embrace structure, process, rules, things they often see as just annoying friction. But the police are absolutely crucial. Without their structure, their focus on compliance, process optimization, you simply can't maintain quality or efficiency as you scale. You'd collapse under your own operational weight. You need that stability they bring, even if it feels less exciting.
Makes sense. So within those teams, how do we maximize individual potential? The model that comes up again and again is deliberate practice. This isn't just putting in hours. It's about constantly pushing yourself on skills that are just outside your current ability and critically getting consistent real-time feedback, often from a coach or mentor.
And it's really important to get the nuance here. We hear about the 10,000-hour rule all the time, right? But the sources emphasize, and the original researcher Erickson himself noted, it's not just about the quantity of hours, it's the quality. You could noodle around on a piano for 10,000 hours, playing the same easy songs and barely improve. It's the deliberate part, the struggle, the focus on weaknesses, the immediate feedback loop that drives real mastery.
And delivering that crucial feedback effectively, that's a skill in itself. Which brings us to radical candor. This is that 2x2 matrix. You need to care personally about the individual, and you need to challenge directly. Get both right.
Exactly. If you challenge directly but don't show you care, personally, you just come across as a jerk. Or worse, manipulative. That's called obnoxious aggression, not good. But if you care personally but you don't challenge directly because you're afraid to hurt their feelings, well, you fall into ruinous empathy. You're being nice, but you're not giving them the feedback they actually need to grow. Radical candor, that high care, high challenge quadrant, is the sweet spot. It's direct, but it's kind and constructive.
We also need to touch on the psychological roadblocks, things that stop people reaching their potential. We often hear about imposter syndrome, that feeling that you're actually not as good as people think, that you're kind of faking it and don't deserve your achievements.
Right. And that contrasts really sharply with the initial dangerous peak of the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is basically when people with low ability in a certain area significantly overestimate their ability. They lack the self-awareness to even recognize their own incompetence.
So practically speaking, in an office environment, what does that look like? Which one is maybe the trickier challenge for a manager?
Well, the Dunning-Kruger person is probably the one, eagerly volunteering for tasks they're totally unqualified for, super confident they can do it. They can cause a lot of problems downstream. The person dealing with imposter syndrome is more likely the one doing excellent work quietly in the corner, maybe never asking for a raise, constantly undervaluing their contributions. As a manager, you need to recognize which pattern you're seeing to manage their development and confidence effectively. Very different approaches needed.
Okay, one last piece on the internal dynamics. The organizational context itself. Culture matters hugely, especially as you scale. And a big part of culture is how time is structured. Leaders need to grasp the fundamental clash between the manager's schedule and the maker's schedule. The manager's schedule is optimized for meetings, context switching, short blocks of time, an hour here, an hour there.
Whereas the maker's schedule for your engineers, writers, designers, anyone doing deep creative or analytical work requires long, uninterrupted stretches of time to get into flow and be productive. If you force people who need the maker's schedule onto the manager's schedule, constantly interrupting them with meetings and pings, you basically destroy their productivity and probably make them miserable. So a key part of good organizational culture is actively shielding your makers, giving them those protected blocks of time.
And finally, organizational size itself imposes limits. We've probably all heard of Dunbar's number, right? Around 150 people. That's supposedly the cognitive limit for the number of people you can maintain stable social relationships with, where you know who everyone is and how they relate to each other.
But it's not just that one number. The sources point out there are smaller breakpoints too, like around 10 to 15 people, a tight team, then maybe 30 to 50. Each time you cross one of these thresholds, you need to explicitly change how you structure communication and organization. Otherwise, things start to get chaotic and fragmented. You can't just keep running a 50-person group the same way you ran a 10-person one.
Okay, that's a great overview of the internal side. Let's pivot now to the external strategy piece. How do we flex market power? So what is market power, fundamentally? It's the ability to profitably raise your prices without losing all your customers.
Exactly. And the classic, maybe infamous example often cited is the EpiPen. The company, Mylan, had something like over 90% of the market for emergency allergy injectors. Between 2007 and 2016, they hiked the price by over 500%, and they kept most of their market share. Why? Because there were very few, if any, viable alternatives for consumers. That is pure market power in action.
And how does this idea apply to, say, an individual's career?
Well, think about your skills in the job market. If you only possess basic, easily replaceable, undifferentiated skills, you're essentially a commodity. If any company can easily find 10 other people who can do exactly what you do, you have basically zero market power, zero leverage to negotiate your salary much beyond the going rate. So developing specialized, in-demand skills that aren't easily replicated, that's the first step to building your own personal market power and competitive advantage.
To get that kind of advantage, whether it's for a company or yourself, often requires making a contrarian bet. Is that right? It's not enough to just be right. You need to be right when most other people are wrong.
Precisely. Superior performance, whether in investing or business strategy, tends to come from being both right and contrarian. As the sources quote, investor Charlie Munger, mimicking the herd invites regression to the mean. If you just do what everyone else is doing, you should expect average results at best.
Which leads directly to Peter Thiel's concept of a secret. What's that about?
A secret, in Thiel's sense, is some important truth about the world. Maybe about technology or markets or human behavior that isn't widely known or, more often, is widely disbelieved. Think about Airbnb early on. The established hotel industry saw, well, hotels. Airbnb saw this massive untapped supply of rooms in people's homes and a corresponding untapped demand from travelers wanting something different. That was their secret. The belief that strangers would trust each other enough to share homes and that people desired that kind of local experience. It was a contrarian bet on a truth others dismissed. They were right, and it paid off hugely.
Okay, so you make a contrarian bet, you find a secret, you build something valuable. Now you need to protect it. That's where the idea of a moat comes in, right? Like a castle ditch defending against attackers.
Exactly. You need barriers to entry to keep competitors at bay. What can those moats be? Lots of things. A really strong brand people trust, specialized skills or intellectual property like patents. And a really powerful one is lock-in, creating high switching costs for your customers.
How does lock-in work?
Lock-in makes it expensive or difficult or just plain annoying for customers to switch to a competitor. Think about software ecosystems. Switching from, say, Adobe's design suite to something else isn't just the cost of the new software. It's retraining, it's converting old files, it's disrupting established workflows for your whole team. That's a high switching cost. Or think about Facebook. The cost of leaving isn't monetary. It's abandoning your entire network of friends and connections. That social switching cost creates massive lock-in and preserves their market power.
But even with a strong moat, market power isn't permanent. It needs constant defense. Which brings us to that famous warning from Intel's Andy Grove. Only the paranoid survive.
Yeah, and the cautionary tale here is almost always Kodak. It's incredible, really. Kodak actually invented the first digital camera way back in 1975. They had the secret. They were the first mover.
Yeah.
But they failed to pivot. They didn't invest heavily enough in digital because they were making so much money from their existing film business. It was their cash cow. They weren't paranoid enough to disrupt themselves before competitors figured it out and crossed that technological chasm. They clung to the past, and ultimately, the market left them behind.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a ton of ground today. We went from analyzing conflict with game theory and the subtleties of social norms to building high-performing teams using things like deliberate practice and radical candor, and finally, to understanding how to build and defend strategic market power using moats and contrarian thinking.
And the thread connecting all of this really is the goal of making your thinking more, well, antifragile. That's the term Nassim Taleb uses. You want a way of thinking that doesn't just withstand stress or mistakes, but actually gets better from them. Learning constantly, applying the right high-level model to the right situation. It's like a shortcut to more sophisticated reasoning.
So for everyone listening, what stands out to you from all this as you kind of process this deep dive? Which one of these models, prisoner's dilemma, social norms, radical candor, moats, maybe secrets, could you apply directly this week to a challenge you're facing, whether it's a conflict, building your team, or thinking about your own career strategy?
And just before we wrap up, let me leave you with one final, maybe provocative, middle model to chew on. It comes from the military. Generals always fight the last war. What does that mean? It means armies, organizations, even individuals tend to default to the strategies and tactics that worked for them last time, in their previous success, their last war. Even if the current situation, the technology, the competitors, the environment has fundamentally changed. So the question to ask yourself when you face your next big challenge is, are you truly adapting your strategy to this specific battle? Or are you just unconsciously recycling the playbook from your last victory? That's the constant challenge of adaptability.